Hello once again, fellow flight simmers and cockpit builders. Welcome to another video here. This one is prompted by a question that somebody asked me during the live stream last week. And they asked me, how do I do it to solder the small, very little tiny solder joints on the multiplexer boards? So today we are going to talk about soldering. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the tools that I have. You know, it's nothing special, but I have a very cheap soldering iron here. Um, it's a EGC brand, which I don't even know what that stands for, but it's a 25 watt iron. So when you're dealing with very small electronics, you don't want to use something like very, very powerful. It would be nicer to have a um, soldering station, which you know you can control the temperature of the iron. And I do have another one that's a 40 and 25 watts, and I usually only use the 25 watts on that one as well. But maybe even a 15 watt will do for something like this. So when you get a soldering iron, most of the time they do come with a sponge, and you know you need to have it wet so that you can clean the tip off. You know, when you have excess solder on the tip, you can just go ahead and wipe it off on there, and the solder will usually come off pretty cool, pretty good. You can kind of see little balls of solder right there that already came off. So another way you can clean your soldering iron is with one of these things right here. I'm not sure what kind of metal it is in there. It's not copper, but basically, you know, you just basically stick the soldering iron in there, and that usually takes the solder really nicely off the tip. Now, if that doesn't work, you can also use this soldering tip cleaner, which is basically like a paste. It doesn't want to open now. Okay. So it's basically like a hard paste, but when your soldering iron is nice and hot, you just basically stick it in there and it'll tin the tip of your iron really nicely. And then you can go ahead and stick it back in here and clean it off. And it leaves a really nice shiny residue on the iron. And that's very necessary to have a very nice clean tip in order for you to do these very small solder joints. Um, so now we're going to talk a little bit about removing solder. So sometimes when you're soldering, you might make a mistake. So there's different tools that you can use. You can use one of these pumps, which basically you plug into the wall. It's like a soldering iron itself. You know, it gets hot, and it has this bulb, which you know you press it, you heat up the part that you want to remove the solder from, and then once it's already nice and flowing, you let go of the bulb, and it'll suck the solder up. And usually when you press the bulb again, it will release, you know, the solder that you just sucked up. Now, if you don't want to get something like that, you can always get one of these manual soldering solder removal pumps. So this is basically a spring actuated one, and all you need to do is you arm it by, you know, compressing the spring, and then you're going to basically heat up the piece that you want to remove the solder from, and you put this right on it, and once it's nice and hot and flowing, you just press the button to remove it, and it'll suck up the solder. And when once in a while you need to remove the tip here and basically empty out, you know, all the solder that it might have inside. All right, so now we're going to talk about different types of solder, and for that we'll go to my other camera. So you can buy solder in a variety of different thicknesses, and most of the one that I have bought, and it's one of the more popular ones, is 6040. That's I think that's the combination of metals, you know, whether it's lead or other metals that are combined, and it has a rosin core, which means basically in the core it has flux. So the flux is what helps clean the surface areas that are to be soldered, so that there's no impurities or oxidation on them, so that it can make a good bond. So I have always, just by chance, all the one that I've ever bought has been rosin core. And as you can see, there's different thicknesses. This one right here is the thickest one that I have, and I'm not even sure what the thickness is, but it must be about maybe 1.1 inch at least, 1/10 of an inch at least, or maybe even a little bit more. This one right here is 0.062. which is still pretty thick. And then I have this one right here, which is 0.050, and it's also rosin core. And then this is the one I mostly always use. This one is 0.032, and it's by far the thinnest of all of these. I also do have another one here that comes in a different container. It comes in this tube right here. That's 0.40, so it's a little bit thicker than this one here. And this one's probably usable for these projects right here as well. All right, so today we're going to be dealing mostly with preparing the multiplexer boards, whether it be like this or like this. I've been experimenting with putting this kind of connectors on them lately because I've always used to use these type of connectors, but I've noticed lately that sometimes when I'm using the 20 gauge wire, which is one of the more common ones that I was using all the time, it seems to be that on some of these, it was having a very hard time, getting inserted into the holes without causing a little bit of strain, and sometimes bending them. So I have actually bought some 20 gauge, 22 gauge 8 conductor wire so that I can use it for that. And I'll show you again, once again right now, in the video why why I use this kind of wire. But so basically, we're gonna take a brand new multiplexer board, and we're gonna solder. I always like to solder on the part where I'm gonna put the inputs, the buttons and switches and all that stuff. I always like to solder the males, and on the other part, I like to solder the female headers on the part over here where the data lines and everything are gonna come into. But of course, you need to cut this to the right size because you only need 8 of them. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. Oh, one more thing before I forget. There is one more thing that you can use for removing solder, and it's the solder wick here. I mean the copper wick or braid. So basically, because solder loves copper, it basically you just put it on the part where you want to remove the solder from, and you can just press on it, to heat it up, and the solder will stick to it. As you can kind of see right here on the tip, there's a little part that I already used right there. So this is pretty handy to have too. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this little multiplexer board here, and I am going to put the male ends of the headers on this side over here. So I always put it on this side so I can also see the letters, of all the connections of the pins, but also because it's flatter on this side, and wherever you want to put it down, you just basically you don't have the chip on that side. And for that, I need to get one of these right here, and I will basically cut 8 of them off so that I can put it in there. So just before you do it, just make sure that you actually did get enough pins, to put it in there and have all of them filled. And if you want, I mean, you can probably clean it up a little bit so it doesn't have a lot of extra plastic on the end. So you can cut off, any excess. That's just to make it look nicer, it doesn't really fit any purpose. It's basically just put it upside down like this. And then once the soldering iron is nice and hot, I will get started. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so that you guys can get a better look at the actual soldering. Let's see if we could make it happen. Hopefully it stays focused really nicely so that you guys can actually see the way the solder flows in there. So one of the very important things, when you do this is, like I said, first make sure that you have a very, very nice clean tip on the soldering iron. That is very important. So what I found that works really good is you put the soldering iron on the pin and the pad that you're about to solder, and you hold it there for like 3 to 5 seconds to allow them to get really, really hot, because the solder has a tendency to flow wherever it's, nice and hot. and it'll stick, it'll make a better connection, a better bond to the metal. So I put it on there for a couple of seconds, and then I basically feed the solder into it. And you don't want to really feed the solder into the soldering iron itself unless you really, really have to. But if it's very nice and hot, you shouldn't have to. And then you just touch the solder onto the pad and the pin, and it should fill the gap right there. So once it finishes filling in the gap and you see that it has enough, you hold the soldering iron for like 3 seconds more, and you should see it kind of pop. Sometimes it's like it goes into the hole and then it pops a little bit, and then you remove the soldering iron really quick. So let's see if we can do this. Let me see. I'm gonna put that right there so it doesn't let it move. And let's see. First we do a quick little test to see if the soldering iron is nice and hot, and it looks like it is. All right, so we'll start with this one right here. Just touch it and hold it there a few seconds, and then feed the solder into it. And then let it go. All right, now I'll do one on this side up here. All right, so right there I seen the little pop, so I just let it go. And you can see that it forms a nice little billet. They call them billets, I think, when they form that little cone. And that's the way it should look. It should not look like a big blob, and it should not look flat. It should have a little bit of a cone on the top, going towards the top, I mean. So I'll go ahead and do this one. Okay, remove it. And then I'll go ahead and do this one here. Oops, oh, that wasn't good. But the good thing is that after you put a couple of them, you don't need to hold it or have anything holding it. So we'll go ahead and do that again here. Okay, I'll go back up to the top here. I don't like to concentrate too much heat in one location on the board. Oops, because it could also okay, I'll move it back over here where you could see it. So yeah, I don't like concentrating too much heat on the circuit board. I don't really know how much it takes to damage the chip, how much heat it could take, but I just like to spread it around. So I'll jump from one area to another, and sometimes I'll even wait a few seconds in between so that I don't concentrate the heat too much. So right now, let's do this end one over here. The end ones are the hardest ones to do because the little board wants to flip on me like it did right now. All right, I'll come back over here to this one here. So I almost gave up on recording this video because this is, believe it or not, the third try, the third time. That's why I have this one here and I have this one here, because I had already tried this video, and the first time my camera, not my camera, but the recording software decided it didn't want to save the video. So it basically didn't work. The second time, for some reason, with a little laptop that I was using, apparently doesn't have the horsepower to record the video at, not even 30 frames a second. So there was a lot of jittering, a lot of stuttering on the video. So I was about to send it up that way, but I was like, nah, it's not even good quality. So I wanted to give you guys something a little bit better quality that will show what's going on actually, not a time lapse video. All right, let's go back up here. Hmm, that one didn't stick. Let's try that again. See, that's what happens when you don't heat up the pin and the pad really good. The flow of the solder doesn't want to go. This is much better. Okay, I'll go back over here. I'm not sure if you're able to see on the video the way the solder kind of like flows, like it just melts and then it flutters a little bit when it's going into the little hole. I hope the video shows that pretty good. And as you can see, if you concentrate your heat on one pad, there's really no danger of it going to other pads. You know, that's one of the things I was very scared of at first too, that it would be basically flowing all over the place. But that's why it's very important to use thin solder and then to concentrate your heat only on one pad and one pin at a time. That way the solder doesn't want to go anywhere but on that particular one. All right, let's go back, finish off the bottom over here. So I would say all in all, I do about 5 seconds. So if I put it on here now, I'll count to about 5 seconds. Then I'll feed in the solder. And then I'll count to about 5 seconds after I feed in the solder and then just remove it. All right, so that's it. So now just to finish it off, I'll clean up my soldering iron here. I didn't take my own advice. I didn't wet the sponge. I just relied on the humidity that was there from yesterday's attempt at recording this video. So now, as you can see, all of them have a nice little billet on it, little dome, and none of them are touching each other. I think I could see that pretty good even here on the camera. So that's how you do that. Now it's all done. And obviously, as I mentioned before, for the connections, you know, I use this to stick them into the appropriate slots there. And this is a 22 gauge right here. So let's pretend I was going to use this one for an output multiplexer. Then I would just basically start, you know, I would line them up here to get all the wires in, and then you could just, if you do it right, you can just basically stick them all in at the same time, and they stay pretty good. You know, sometimes you can't do all 7 or 8 of them. You know, you have to do a few at a time. Now remember, if I was going to be using this for an input multiplexer, you would need to do on the back, like I did on this one, you would need to solder a jumper between the ground and the EN pins. So you would need to solder something like that. Or alternatively, you can do something here on the top and you just need to make sure that that EN pin also goes to ground. But that's pretty much it. All right, well, I guess this is all I have for this video. Hopefully it'll help some of you guys understand that, you know, even though I'm not a professional at it, I've been doing it for a while now, you know, but it's not that hard to do it. You know, you just have to make sure you have a very nice clean soldering iron tip and get some thin solder. And it's doable for anybody, I would say. All right, guys. Well, hopefully you guys enjoy this video. Finally, third time's a charm, like they say. So it'll be going up as soon as I get it edited. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.